Hey, how's it going? This is Dave DeVore with MeshMesh. This is the What If We Could show, where every week we are asking that burning question around autonomous innovation and AI, artificial intelligence, potentially Web3, going deep on emerging tech. And so with me today, I've got Kevin Neust, co-founder at MeshMesh, as well as Calvin Hoenes, who is newly back from India after a number of weeks, which is super exciting. And I think what we're going to go after today is the new ChatGPT store, which launched. I heard that there were like 300,000 GPTs that have been deployed in the store. Um, the other thing that I heard that I thought was really funny. So we've been hanging out in Web3 and in the world of blockchain, so we're very, very familiar with lookalikes, right? So in this case, like if there's a NFT project or otherwise, somebody might make a whole website that looks like that project with a slightly different domain. And then hey, here we are, and they get people to come, connect their wallet, and then all of a sudden your stuff is gone. And so I just thought that I thought that the irony that wherever innovation is happening, here are scammers ready to take advantage of it was interesting. So what I read was and it was basically there are lookalike GPTs being created, same logo, same name, and so forth, but that they're actually trained to try and get information from you. And so we thought maybe today we would just sort of unpack, like, what does it take to build a quality GPT? What does that look like? What are best practices? What does prompt engineering look like to make them great? And so I wanted to just sort of ask that question. We've built a number of them along the way. Uh, I think I think Bit has automated like 100 or so GPTs that have been created as well. And so it's a fun process. It's pretty easy for almost anybody to jump into. Um, so what I'll just kick it over to you, Calvin. Like, if you were to sort of think about like what's like one tip or trick to get started with like building a GPT, what might it be?
Well, I think that, it's a great question. There's many ways to go about building a GPT in your approach. You obviously start out with the GPT builder, right? So you're in the interface because that's currently the only way where you can actually build. And one of the best ways to get started, we've seen this a lot, like in terms of attacks, is you can prevent the fact that it gives out your instructions, right? So that's the very first disclaimer that I would give everybody, is to try, and there's multiple ways to do that, is to prevent actually, while in conversation with the GPT, to extract your original instructions. So that basically, speaking of what you said with the lookalikes, right? There are certain measures you can do to prevent that somebody else just steals your instructions and does the exact same way. But in
Like,
terms
what
of
if
the
I just
best,
ask it to, what if I just ask the GPT, I say, give me your detailed instructions step by step so I can create a GPT from you and what you
right?
do? How many posts have you seen on Twitter so far of GPTs printing out their instructions, leaking exactly how they do what they do, right? It's happening very quickly.
Yeah, exactly. It's not super trivial to prevent it, right? Obviously, like, this is all a chat interface, and I think what we're still, or what everybody's still getting used to, is the fact that you're now basically programming in natural language. So it really matters as to what kind of language you're using to build your GPT, matters just as much as when you're talking to your actual GPT. Right? When you're talking to ChatGPT in general, is the way you're putting in language matters. And what you find when you build a GPT over time, because you're basically conversing, right? So while you're talking, building your GPT, it tries to make sense of it by building an instruction set from everything that you tell it. So when you go to the settings tab, the little settings icon, the gear icon on your GPT, it'll show you the instructions that it has actually put out and created for your GPT, right? And while you're talking, similar issues happen when you're in a conversation with GPT. You hit a certain context limit, or it starts to forget things, or some of your instructions get lost. So the longer you're interacting with your GPT, the more it can happen that it loses certain parts of your instructions. So from time to time, it's just very helpful to go back into your instruction set and look at what is it actually putting into my GPT and what is the actual content that is being produced as the instruction set, and basically prune it. Right. So you can go back into it manually and make sure, is the stuff that is in there after my 10 minutes of conversations with it still relevant, or are some of the parts, lost in the context window madness? And do I actually need to remove some of these things?
Can you ask the GPT to summarize that for you and do that work and provide back the double check of the context window? Effectively, have it repeat back the instructions that you told it, and is that double check? What does that look like?
Yeah, it would be funny if you ask it back, can it give you the instructions back, and hopefully your mechanism of preventing that has worked at this point. But you can definitely do that, right? You can actually ask a GPT, since it's all that natural language coding, you can go back and clean it up. But still, like most of the things, mistakes happen, so it's always good to kind of double check your actual instruction set. And it's also funny, right? Like what you said, Dave, in terms of all the lookalike GPTs. Sure, these things happen, and also like your instructions can be put back. What's interesting when you're creating a GPT and when you think about the actual value that you're providing, the GPT instruction set is just the first layer, right? Like everything after that, the actual actions that you put in and the actual APIs that you put after it are where, in my opinion, the real meat of the value creation happens. Because like the initial GPT is a good first set to make it easier to give you that initial instruction set that you want and get you to your result faster, right? Like, I mean, we've all been there when you're in a GPT and you start from fresh again every time you open a chat, and you have to kind of bring the GPT back, or bring ChatGPT back to where you actually want it to be, and then you can start the conversation. And in that sense, GPTs are a great shortcut to make that easier. But the real value comes in when you start adding actions. And so I think when you're trying to think about how do you build a GPT that is really valuable, is a good question as to what are the public services or other services that it can add on to that enhance the value of a GPT per se.
Yeah,
by
so
something that it cannot inherently provide.
for those folks who aren't familiar with this idea of a GPT action, let's break it down a little bit, right? Like, what can you do with an action?
Right. Like as GPT is basically trained on an existing set of knowledge, right? And that's necessarily what it's using to give its answers. So if you want to get any information that is not inherently part of that data set, so let's say information from the web, or it might just be something trivial as what's the current weather in San Francisco, then you need to get this from another source than from GPT itself. So you need to use an external data source to provide that for you. And this is where actions come into play, because you can basically call external services to get that information that is not available to GPT and put it into your GPT as a text to then use it for the next conversation.
So you can put URLs in as an action, websites in as an action, right? And you can also put like JSON in and YAML and whatnot, like more like developer languages as actions as well. Like, what's some examples do you think? What would be a good example of where you might put JSON in on an action?
So I think actions are basically built on what is called the OpenAI specification, right? So every major service that has been built, these APIs, the interfaces to communicate it with. Let's say you want to get data from Twitter, or you want to get accurate weather data from weather.com, for example, are built through a specification called OpenAI specification. So that's where you can get to kind of tell GPT how to communicate with that action with another external service, right? And it's just a standard that has been developed to make that easier. So what you can do, you can go out and you can look at a specification of a certain API that you want to use out there. And this could be anything that you find on the web. right? Like let's take weather.com as an example. You find the weather.com API and you say, how does this API work? You can get an open API specification for that interface and then copy it into the action of GPT to allow GPT to communicate with it. And you can define actions, right? Like an example would be you define an action that is called get the weather, and it has certain attributes that you can pass to it, like the location, like let's say San Francisco. Mm. And then what GPT can do, it interprets that specification when you talk to it and says, hey, look, I want to get the weather in San Francisco, and GPT will understand I need to call the get weather action with San Francisco as my attribute, and it will call that and give you the result back.
How about triggering actions? Is it possible to trigger external APIs to do things with a GPT?
Yes, absolutely. Right. Just like I'm using the same API specification to get the weather, I could also, well, in the weather case, it doesn't work as well, right? Because I can't tell weather.com to what I want the weather for San Francisco to be.
Self-reporting your hyper local weather, right, on your street for their data set. Yep.
Yeah, especially at this time of the year, right? You might want to have that fog in San Francisco go away, but that might be harder. But you can definitely use it to execute any action, right? So let's say, I mean, what's a very interesting case is Zapier at this point, right? Because Zapier has webhook possibility.
And Zapier actions as well
right,
now.
So you have Zapier actions now, right? So you can basically tell it to reach out to Zapier on your behalf to do something. So you could do things like, and we've seen some example where they use GPTs as your now more de facto personal assistant, right? There's been many different approaches for this. But one is you go in and you use your GPT and you say like, do this thing for me, send an email for me. And you could technically do that with your own Zapier integration. It's different than using it in your public GPT, right? Because you don't necessarily want your access to your Zapier be a public offering as a public GPT. That might not be advisable depending on your Zapier plan. Because basically that would allow other people to use it. On your behalf.
So like don't hook up your email to a public GPT.
Correct.
Right. Yeah. And so you're in some ways now you could if it goes to Zapier, I mean the world of opportunity, like world of possibilities, right? I don't know how many integrations Zapier has now, like in the hundreds. And deep hooks in a lot of ways. And as well as we've seen a lot with Make, and people sort of creating Make templates. And then some people have been selling these Make templates to sort of tie GPTs together with all sorts of sort of triggered actions out on the internet. I'm thinking, I'm thinking a little bit about enterprise, right? And I'm thinking about businesses, right? And that's really where MeshMesh is focused. From the perspective of like security implications for an enterprise, there is sort of an enterprise GPT version, in which case all of that data, all the data that you put into it is siloed from everybody else, right? And I'm not sure if there's any type of additional features or functionality around actions and integrations, or do you know, is it the same stuff generally?
I mean, it's similar. It's funny now that they introduced the GPT store, they also introduced this additional team plan. I don't know if you've seen that.
I did.
And with the additional plan, there's a small note saying that on the team plan, your chat messages and your conversations are not included in the training data by default. So basically, I mean, they've added obviously, as they're trying to get closer to enterprise, they've added a couple of more guardrails to first of all limit how this data is exposed in the first place. But when it comes to calling actions, is a bit of a different thing, right?
Yeah, I also heard that the team plan right now, like GPTs that are created in the team plan, can't be published to the store. and I've actually saw some people complaining because they ran out to get the team, and it's like us, like it's like you want to collaborate with the team, you want to like, hey, Calvin, can you look this thing over? Is it, am I doing anything wrong? Or like, hey, could you add this action or whatnot? And like quickly on a business side, you are, you want to collaborate, so it makes sense the team plan, but at the same time, they've not enabled teams to produce GPTs. You're still on an individual plan to produce GPTs, and I guess it also opens up the possibility, as soon as you have teams, you also open up the possibility back to scams, right? Now you have teams of scammers who are coming in here and and going after this stuff, right? It'll be interesting to see how they separate the the good from the bad and the from the ugly, right? And how they actually figure out what is what is real and what's not along the way.
Yeah, it sounds like if you give OpenAI the benefit of the doubt, they tilted towards security by not allowing team plans to publish publicly their GPTs. You could call that security. Like, hey, teams are just getting started. They're going to create some GPTs. They want to use them internally, and it would be an accident if they published it publicly. So let's just not allow them to right now. That's giving them the benefit of the doubt that was conscious. The other side of that is maybe it's just a feature request they haven't got around to yet. It's just a day one. They don't have it unlocked yet. And then I think it's probably closer to the middle, where it's, what do you do with what you said, Dave? What do you do with controls at the team level for GPTs being created? So let's throw this in a giant enterprise organization that they've got team plans turned on, and there's 10,000 employees at said giant corporate company. One rogue employee, one intern, right? One contractor says, I'm going to spin up some GPTs and use, I'm not going to disparage any big brand names on this call here, but use big brand name as the publisher to the store as the trust factor. And so then somebody jumps right in and says, oh, wow, big brand released a GPT. Check this out. Goes gangbusters on Twitter and is out there with thousands of people using it before the company can retract it. And then going back to those actions, right, as a potential security loophole, what information could someone collect quickly on a large group of people trading on some trust of a big brand? So it's probably a big scary one for big brands to think about, the permission levels, right?
Yeah. And so we're quickly into like business verification, which is hard. I mean, we've seen that hard, business and brand verification, which is really hard. I mean, we saw Twitter try and do it. They're still trying to do it. It's not easy because, maybe you do it off of an email address, but how do you know that the person with the email address at the organization has permission to represent the brand, right? So it's like, you're quickly at a place where you are, doing verification and deals with like the executive office or not at all, right? And verifying, all sorts of like KYC, information around who the organization is. So so it's going to be interesting. It's going to be super interesting as this stuff rolls out. I mean, the other thing too is that I think is going to be interesting is like, especially in organizations, and we know like these large organizations want a lot of control. They want to be able to control not only with what people do, what people see, but they also want to be able to control how people act, right? And it's hard to do with a prompt, right? So, I mean, I know we have another episode coming where we start talking about, we start talking about what the AI UX looks like in the future, right? But it probably does not look like prompts for inside of a brand. It probably does not look like wide open prompts, right? It looks like a lot more. It looks like a lot more use case specific inside of an organization. for what a specific role can potentially do. Is it like big yes, no buttons, as opposed to being able to, just prompt anything into that they want, right? So it'll be
Natural language is also such a freaking vast space, right? Like we've seen that story before when the Chevy example of the chatbot on the website. It's incredibly hard to limit it to a brand's needs. And I mean, OpenAI does an incredible job at sort of limiting it from the ethical standpoint, right? All the moral issues. I think a lot of these things have gotten a ton better. But limiting natural language space is not a trivial thing to do. And so, like you said, right, like exposing that through a chat interface also opens up the amount of interactions you can do with it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how many brands start to adopt their own siloed LLMs, right? And for that specific reason, just so that way they can really tightly control what it is, what it can do, what it's trained on. I think OpenAI has some of those capabilities, but at the same time, I don't know what the enterprise license is on OpenAI. At the same time, there's so many good open source LLMs that are popping up. And, there's going to be a lot of competition for smaller language models that do very specific things that are a lot cheaper, as opposed to just one big, large behemoth, right?
Yeah, and you get the benefit of cheaper training too. Like there's a lot of it in terms of advancements.
Yeah, and what if those enterprises want to air gap their certain LLMs from the internet, where it just doesn't have access to the internet? So Mistral, for example, someone wrapped it in a mobile app. I downloaded it on my phone. I have the Mistral model LLM running on my iPhone 13 Pro, right? I can go to Big Bend State Park where my cell phone reception doesn't work, and I have effectively the knowledge of the world in my pocket, right? 98% of the questions I would want to ask, I'd have the answer in an offline mode. So what does that mean for enterprises when they start stitching these together, both LLMs and smaller models, and they say, hey, these just can't interact with the internet because they don't need to, right? And then there's a one controlled gate that has human check and balance of what goes in and out potentially, to really make sure that those controls are tightened versus trying to tighten down the controls on the what will become hundreds of models running in their organization, right? We're talking about ChatGPT right now as if it's like the only thing anybody's ever going to use, and there's not going to be hundreds of models chained together doing their work and coordinating.
Yeah, it's true.
And then only reaching out to in the cases where you do need external information, right? Or where you need like up-to-date and recent information, and then let the reasoning actually be airtightly, air-gapped. And then going back to like what we said with actions, right? You can get the recent data from outside. You can do that with basically any other model, and then have the reasoning be completely air-gapped.
Yeah. So here's an interesting question. Can you tie together multiple GPTs with actions?
You cannot. Well, maybe the definition of a GPT, right? So the GPT as it sits right now in the store where you can use it is separate from what OpenAI calls assistants. Assistants are essentially GPTs, but they are not accessible through the GPT store and not through ChatGPT's interface. So what you create, what is now in the GPT store, and the GPTs are through the GPT builder and can only be built and created and interfaced with through the ChatGPT interface. And then on the other hand, there are assistants which have a similar capability but are accessible through the OpenAI API. And so what you would need currently to interface from one GPT to another GPT is basically an API call. And since the GPTs aren't public, you can't do that yet. What you could do, however, you could build your own assistants. And now we're going into deeper dev terrain, right? But you could basically build your own assistants, build an API server for it so they can talk to the assistants, and then build one GPT that can talk to these assistants. But it's not really like you have all those GPTs together right now talking to each other. Like you would need to build your own system. And I mean, there's a lot of the systems that, we've also been building where you have multiple agents working together, multiple assistants working together, but it's not possible through the GPT interface as of today.
So, like crystal ball, do we think that GPT is going to make it possible for people to tie GPTs together inside the interface? So, like obviously, we can do it. We put our nerd hats on and we'll tie some stuff together. Do you think it's on their roadmap to allow people to begin to use multiple GPTs orchestrated together?
I mean, it is looking into the crystal ball, but my personal take is no, to be honest, because I think it's not directly in their line of sight in terms of what they're achieving, right? I think a lot of the benefit of GPTs to OpenAI currently is that it's a little bit like when you're a writer and you have that blank paper problem, right? The blank slate where you don't know how to start. And I think what they've seen with what OpenAI has seen a lot with ChatGPT is that a lot of people have that initial hurdle. They have this massive, wide open, infinite language model in front of them, but they don't know how to start. And so GPTs are a very, very helpful place, or a very helpful mechanism to ease that adoption for them, right? Because now you can say, I have a very specific problem and I need a machine to solve this for me. Like, let's take one of the Python mentor GPTs that we have brought up, right? So you take that and I say, I want to learn how to use Python. So sure, I can go in, I can use that GPT and I immediately know what I'm solving for, which is a lot easier than having, that blank piece of paper to start with. So I think for the foreseeable future, that is in their line of sight what they're trying to solve. And they'll probably have enough problems to solve with the store, again, for the foreseeable future to deal with before they go and think about hooking them together.
I think something that I haven't seen talked about really much yet is what they really get from the store. They just got tens of thousands of people to help them with their new user acquisition and their retention of their core service, right? We all just collectively gave workflows and use cases and helped remove blank pieces of paper from a lot of workflows, like any workflow. Like imagine something, you can search the store and you can find a GPT to get started and get past the blank page of the
first prompt.
Of the first prompt, right? And that's going to drive so many new people into GPT and OpenAI where they can actually one they'll discover an entry point into it, and two, they can actually get value out of it. How many people have you talked to that have said, yeah, I tried GPT, but I didn't really get any value out of it, chatted with it for like 10 minutes and thought it was a cool parlor trick and moved on, not realizing or not knowing how to get started getting the value out of it. I think that, and no, unless I missed it, right? Like no pricing, no rev share model announcement yet on the horizon of how that works with store creators.
And,
right?
And still they had 300,000 GPTs released. So you have to think about that, right? There are no conditions out there yet, but still people are jumping on it. They've done that trend very well.
I found it fascinating to look at what's trending in the store, right? So, and I'll just read off sort of like some of the top ones here. So there's an AI research assistant trained on 200 million academic papers, which I know academia
the consensus.
And there's two at the top which are like PDF assistants, ask your PDF, to like basically summarize it for you, right? There's probably 3 or 4 that are like logo creator, image generator, video GPT, designer GPT. There's Grimoire, which is a coding GPT, which is number 4, which is interesting. There's Web Pilot, which is like browse right API offerings. It's also really interesting to see who the creators are for some of this sort of stuff, right? And it's like, I didn't even know, SEO.ai and, ScholarAI.io. And, there's a lot of, businesses and, hacker and like tinkers, as we like to call them, popping up, and really interesting to see which ones are rising to the top. But to your point, like there's, featured is AllTrails, which AllTrails is a well-known app, right? I mean, traditional app, right? So it's
And I
really
think Canva
going.
has been up the list pretty high too. Like that was one of the
Canva
few
has
brand
been
examples.
up there.
Yeah.
It got kicked off of the top 12. I don't think it's on the top 12 anymore. Yeah, Canva is up there. But it's true. I mean, any given category, programming, productivity, research analysis, lifestyle. I mean, it is just chock full. Like, it's like I was talking about like college, and having a like college fund for my kids, and I'm like, I don't even know whether it's necessary. Like, do they just need a GPT account? And like, like
How many?
for $20 a month, if they're self-directed, we have
Right.
everything that we possibly need at our fingertips right now to learn anything that you want to learn. And it's kind of been that way with the internet for a while, with with YouTube and Google, but like, and now it's like it feels so consolidated and quick. You don't need to go spend all day searching around. You just need to know how to ask the right questions. So it's
absolutely.
gonna get really interesting.
And I think that's precisely what they're trying to make better, right? In terms of asking the right questions, like going back to what we said before. I think what OpenAI has probably realized, and I've gotten that feedback from a lot of people that I've talked to. They said, yeah, I used ChatGPT, but it wasn't really great. And to 90% of those people that you talk to, I was like, did you use GPT-4? They all use GPT 3.5. So because you have to jump over that initial hurdle of paying the $20, right, to get into it, and like now to use the GPT, you have to get into the hurdle to really use it. But most people have only gotten into it and basically used the 90, or what is it, 86 IQ equivalent versus the 155 IQ equivalent of the solution, and just
literally
jumped
Albert
off.
Einstein IQ
exactly.
difference, right? Versus like a D in math in high school, or Albert Einstein talking to. Like, think about that. That's of course I would.
So it's a massive.
I'm like a 3.5.
Yeah, and I mean that's why most of the people just jumped out of it, because they're like, okay, they tried it, they tested it, and they're like, it's not that great, right? And so I think now having all those specific pain points that you're really trying to solve is a great way to sell you into it and actually pay for the subscription and then actually get the benefit out of it. So I think with that, we're probably going to see a lot more adoption, because people will actually start seeing the real benefits of what a GPT can do versus just a, base version that doesn't give you anything really.
So does if we repeat this back to you, Calvin, does releasing the GPT store and letting people use GPTs allow OpenAI to delay bumping the free plan up to GPT-4 then? And it's an entry point right now. The GPTs are gonna let people get a taste of it, and then they'll pay. And they still have in the chamber the bullet to say, hey, now everybody gets GPT-4 for their free account, right? Probably comes closer to when 4.5 or 5 comes around. Man, that in itself is a watershed that is probably also underrated. Putting the 4 in everybody's hands as the free trial, and then all those people you just talked about flipping and going, oh, now I get it. Now I understand what this is. And then it'll be walking them into, oh, you like that? How about GPT 4.5? You want to talk to 2 Albert Einsteins at once? We got that for you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very good point. I mean, imagine how insane the knowledge gap is now between people who pay the $20 a month versus people who don't. It's like, like what you said before, right, with the Albert Einstein example. It's like, imagine you would basically get access to 10% of the internet versus you get 100% of the internet.
Mhm.
What difference that makes and what you can do in your day to day is, hard to fathom.
Yeah,
So,
oh, go ahead.
so Dave, you talked about your kids, college fund and what does that look like in a world where they have access to AI, right? I want to pose this question. I felt like this. I heard this and I felt like this when I went to college. It was you go to college to learn how to learn. Like that's the best thing that you can come away with,
It's true.
besides some credentialing. But the value is to learn how to learn. In addition to having a blast doing it, of course, over 4, maybe 5 years. And so now, Calvin, you said it's not. It's actually how to ask the best questions, how to ask great questions, which is a step function up. If we know it in our professional careers, doing this 2 decades plus each. Being able to ask the right questions is the way you get to the best outcomes and answers, and not even having the answers, right? Asking the questions to teams, to problems is what unlocks
Mhm.
that. Now I'm thinking, there are people that are 10 and 20 years in their career before they figure out how to do that. Like, can your
True.
kids do this at like 16, 17, 18? And they're asking questions like seasoned professionals, 45, 50 years old, right? And then what does that mean when they understand how to do that and they're AI enabled for the next 20 and 30 and 50 and probably live for 100 years in a working scenario? Like, holy crap.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I saw, I don't know the reference who came out with it today, and they were saying up to 50% of um, entry level jobs, or not like knowledge based jobs, are going to be replaced over the next 5 years, right? Which is kind of a terrifying number, because and especially as we are starting to see, you know, Jen's, that's not us, right? That's like, my kids for sure, right? And it's like, man, what are the options? Like coffee shops. It'll be interesting. The one thing that I think the digital natives have is they have minds, having played games from very early on. They understand the process of try something, it doesn't work, try something again, it doesn't work, and finding their way to the end point. Like it'll be interesting to see whether that translates to language, right? So far, like the visual, motor, and mind skills are developing. I'm not sure, but I'm not sure if it's going to translate to language, because that is the interaction that's missing inside of a lot of games. You're not having conversations. You're not articulating, and you might not even be, unless you're in school learning how to spell, learning how to write. You know, I don't know that you're really going to be prepared to prompt with the Lego with sort of the level of quality that'll get you there. So it's interesting because I can see how on one level kids are way more prepared than we are in terms of their brain development and working their way through games. On another level, and a lot of times I think they're underdeveloped in terms of their ability to communicate through written and verbal means.
Yeah, and not to speak of social skills, right? I
Not to
think,
speak of social
like,
skills, right?
right, what you were saying, like, I mean, okay, do we still need a college? And the more and more I think about it, or do we still need schools? I think that the primary reason we probably do need schools in an age of like full on artificial intelligence is so that we learn how to deal with other humans. It's like a
It's true.
training to not hit each other, right? All the basic social skills. Like, if you think about it, that's what being in school really delivers, right? Because now you can get all the knowledge everywhere. I can sit in front of ChatGPT and get what I want. What I cannot learn is that, there's another person with another need, and that might conflict with my needs, and that might require compromise. And how do we do that without, hitting them on the head, basically?
Yeah.
Kind of, though, too, right, Calvin? I know we've got some different flavors of growing up and school experience, living in different geographies. From my perspective, U.S. based, very small town based as well. It gave IRL school gave some forced social skills building, but the vast majority of the school experience was actually built to separate, to control, to limit interaction between students and building those skills effectively. So only through proximity did you have to out of like almost a survival style, right, versus an opportunity to thrive and build those and strengthen those. I know my partner is a Montessori teacher. She's lucky enough to be able to translate her experiences and offer something I think is a lot better at building empathy and those social interactions. Something like that, I think, is then at that point I would say, yeah, like it is literally the most valuable thing from my perspective that those children get out of a Montessori style experience. The slim down, how would a public school fix this version? I revert back to my dogs and going like, well, they just need to go to the dog park and socialize. So that's the rudimentary way of what's public school version look like, where you take your kids to the place where they can socialize together, and you remove the education part. The education part's not needed. We got that. AI's got that. Internet's got that. We just need to put you all in proximity and be nice and play nice for a while, right? Build those skills.
Yeah, it's gonna be super. I mean, one of the things that we've talked about is like prompting is the new code, right? And that the engineering of the future is not going to look like engineering of the past, right? And so it'll be really interesting as that practice starts to figure itself out. And we're like very, very early in on like, like prompting, applications to come into existence. And I think I'm out of AI, having sort of built software for so long and whatnot. That's probably the thing that I'm most excited about is like, being able to just go from idea to prototype. And there's already apps out there where prompt a website to come in, to be written on the fly, right? And I think it's going to be really interesting as that comes along. But then the other thing that starts to come right behind that is AI writing AI, right? AI prompting AI, and we've also been exploring that as well. And so
it's very. Go ahead.
Yeah, so anyways, that's the stuff that I'm most excited about. I think that I have a friend who also has little kids, and he started very, very early on. He was sort of on the same tip. He's like, man, college is not the way. And he started very, very early on, like teaching his kids some programming and how to find the answers that they need and whatnot, and really sees the future as like self-taught and less institutional, institutional.
It's interesting when you think about what you said with the example of now using natural language to code. I want to put out an analogy which I think is interesting to think about. So you are bound to lose a certain level of detail as you go up an abstraction layer, right? We're basically going from code, we're going one abstraction layer higher, which is natural language to describe the problem that you're solving, the app that you're building, the website that you're building, whatever it is. So you're bound to lose a certain level of detail. And it's a similar example that when you're going from like, when you used to code stuff in assembly, right? Where you basically gave jump left, right, instructions in your code, and then you went up to an app and an actual interface, right? There were similar arguments back in the days where you said like, yeah, but you can't be as precise with it as you could be in assembly.
Yeah.
And the reality was that in 90% of the cases, it didn't matter.
Doesn't
right?
matter.
The precision that you used for it just didn't matter. And so now we're at a very similar point in time where, you know, a lot of the developers say, yeah, but I can't do this and that. I can't do this precision level. You know, I can't do the 98%. But the reality is that you only need to cover 90 to get to 98% of the cases that really matter. And this is the point where we lose in our level of going from abstraction level to next. Yes, we invariably lose detail, but we accept that because we say it doesn't matter, it makes us so much faster. But it's just very interesting to think about that. And now I think about the implication for code. What you can see is that everybody says, yeah, my website is special, my app is special, but the reality is they are mostly the same with minor changes. And so as we go up that abstraction tree, is like, how much level of detail are we willing to lose? And it's an interesting thing to see to which level it will play out with natural language to replace coding in that abstraction layer. Where do we hit boundaries? Where does it stop? Like, how much detail do we actually want to lose in the application? And my hunch is that we will be very fine losing most of that detail, right?
We're going to lose
We will
most
just be
of it.
saying, yeah, I just need an app that is a table that allows me to store this and that information, right? Whether this is, you know, a very specific form of a table and whether it uses an underlying programming language like Python or JavaScript to do it, do I really care? No.
Yeah.
It gives me an extra 10 milliseconds of performance upgrade. At that moment, I don't care. I might care if I'm scaling to 1 million people, right? That's a different gameplay. So that's why I'm saying it's interesting if you go to big enterprises, will that apply as well or not? Will it apply to these software solutions where scale matters and 10 milliseconds matter? But like I said, in 98% of the cases, it just won't matter because no one cares about the 10 milliseconds.
I saw this meme from a developer, and he was basically like, yeah, everybody's saying that AI is going to put, you know, developers out of a job. I don't think so, because that would require the client to actually describe what they want, right? And so you still
he's not terribly wrong with it.
He's not terribly wrong, because like even and it's like you know, we see this all the time. Like if you're trying to build something for somebody and, you know, they're trying to imagine what they want, and like getting people to give instructions for exactly what they want is really hard, you know, and it's like in order to actually get there, it's like, well, you almost have to take them through a design sprint and like go deep on like, you know, very specific questions around, you know, this thing or that thing, or where's this going, or where do you want to be 6 months from now or a year from now, and so it's interesting because I think part of the role that I think I'm excited about from an engineering perspective is like it's puts engineers a little bit more in the role of architects and less code monkeys, right? And which is really where engineers ought to thrive, right? Is sort of at the level of thinking about like systems thinking and being able to put together complex problems into a solution. That's really where
and business requirements, right?
And business requirements,
like that's
right?
what inches into product and biz dev and business development in general, right? Like this is,
I think it'll be
absolutely
a mix of that in the enterprise. It's a twofold increase in proliferation. I'll hit that in a second, and then the other is I think that the generalists that can solve business problems and drive towards outcomes are the ones that survive and grow and thrive in organizations. And so it's actually the changing of the roles and responsibilities and the minimum requirements for jobs. The proliferation part, think about, I think this analogy holds up. A Photoshop designer, right? Sometimes you really need a really great designer to get into Photoshop with a lot of layers, a lot of brushes, do a bunch of stuff I can't do, and come back with some amazing graphics. A lot of time, I just need to pinch and zoom and crop and filter on my phone, right? And so as that proliferated, the amount of content that was created and edited, 1,000 million folded over the last decade.
Mhm.
I think that is a similar, that'll be similar to what will happen in software, especially internal software. So today, 50% of software is internal in the company that they use to then deliver the output, the outcome for the business. So now all the little things that they wish were automated in their workflows, that they wish they had a tool to help them with, they can speak those into existence, and they'll be like small and tiny. So the GPT store is like our first look into what that looks like without UX UIs on top of it, which will be required, will be mandatory. But it'll be more about speaking your UX UIs into existence and be like, that's good enough. I needed, as you said, Calvin, what are most apps? It's a table to put some data in and display it back out, right? And then give it to me when I ask certain questions of it. And that'll be this giant proliferation of those. And then we'll still need those generalists that are absolutely able to translate business requirements into those outcomes. So I think it's going to really be this giant, it's going to be the bell bar approach effectively.
Yeah, we've talked about too, like, well, we know about especially enterprises, like they want to own their tech. And so I really believe that as the cost of building software goes down, the less likely people are to renew their SaaS, their expensive SaaS solutions, because they'd rather just build it and own it and control it themselves. And we've seen that with organizations that we've worked with, where they want to own it. They've got a DevOps team. They've if they don't own it, they're going to figure out how to build it, and they're very picky about what they're applying licensing to, because it ends up both being a operational cost, but also change management, both getting into it and then getting out of it, and so forth. So it's going to be really, it's going to be really a massive shift in terms of how software gets built, how it gets used inside of organizations, how the economics of software work. I mean, it's gonna be fun.
Can we call it SaaS is dead? 2024 is the beginning of the end for SaaS, right?
I wasn't gonna go there.
Yeah. Have you looked at the have you seen the once.com manifesto? Have you seen that? As an example. From Jason Fried,
co-founder of Basecamp. Yeah.
And they actually
signals.
And they put something out. They actually, I think they put out a product that you just buy once. You pay for it once.
That was the whole
hosted.
idea. Yeah.
Man, I always hate it when I gotta say, like, Bitcoinsky was right, but this is what he was talking about a year ago. And I argued with him. I'm like, no way. And here I am, like, eating my words. I'm like, damn it, man. He's right. Early, but right.
Yeah, there's this one sentence where it says you should own that shit by now. Perpetually early.
This is an awesome.
It's very true. Like, also the models with the pay once, pay as you go. Like, I think we're going to see a lot of these, like, reoccurring and, like, come back again in 2024. I would double down on that.
100%.
The middle mix of the once, I heard him do an interview about it. When I first heard it, I was like, that's the biggest problem I have with it. The best part is paying once for the software. The biggest problem I have is thinking that enterprise organizations can host their own, let's say, Slack instance, right? And run the ops for that. We've seen challenges in organizations. I've been in organizations where that's been a challenge. But if you assume that that's a skill they have to build and they solve that, then that becomes what tech is at that organization, that they have to have ops. The middle ground would be, well, there's a pay-per usage version that is the hosted version, right? That's probably the middle ground that will pop up, and it'll look like every paper message. Like, how many messages did your organization send? Awesome. And it's going to still be 1/10 of the cost of the SaaS version, right?
Yeah, and I think whoever's going to bring out a very efficient maintainer GPT AI is definitely going to be in for a win there. because like as soon as you have a pay once, and it's going to be an enterprise hand, and the software will get rusty, right? Like who are you going to call, right? Unless they develop the internal capability to solve the software that they haven't built. Definitely a problem that needs to be solved.
Calvin can't help but put his security hat on and go, yeah, but who's going to hot fix the security holes?
Who's just going to bump the version number, please?
Yeah, AI.
There should be an AI
There's
for
gonna
that.
be an AI for that.
Okay. Sounds like a good weekend project.
Yeah. This has been awesome. We've diverted away from GPTs. But culturally, OpenAI has done something remarkable. Forget about the tech. Just from the perspective of, and we've been, sort of in this technology for, Kevin, you ran a, machine learning startup years ago. It's we've played around with, a lot of AI technology over the past, decade or 15 years of different sizes and shapes. But what I really like about OpenAI is like they've brought it into the general consciousness.
Yeah,
and
they did the limelight sessions for sure.
And that's when change starts to happen. Is when people wake up and discover something, net new. That's when things really start to accelerate. Is when the general consciousness starts to become aware of a new technology that is a change agent. So, no matter whether we like them, love or hate them, they have done that for the history.
For sure. Books. Can I throw out one more crazy idea? Smashing our Web3 world together with what OpenAI has now done with the GPT store. So what if they wait a little bit to announce their monetization, payment plan style for the store, and when everybody gets restless about it, they look at what GPTs have been used based off of usage, and they airdrop options in OpenAI and as payment. So if your GPTs got a lot of usage here in this time where they're trying to figure out how to monetize it and pay it out, great news. You got a little bit of KYC to do, and you can literally buy like strike price options in OpenAI. Here's your payment. I think that would be a cool mash the worlds together, because we've seen that incentive align a community real fast in Web3. Like, that would be amazing to then own a piece of this revolution here that's happening. And then instead of you go from being upset about the uncertainty of the payment plan of the GPT store to a ride or die creating GPTs and touting it on every single channel, right? So is OpenAI bold enough to airdrop options in their company?
Well, for sure. It's interesting that so many people have. It's interesting the net collective, build around GPTs, and they haven't even yet defined how people get paid from this stuff. Like, I have not heard one line item like, well, here's how you get compensated. I think in the near term, I think that's sort of what people are sitting on their seat trying to figure out is like, well, I built this thing. How do I get paid? Is it, it's a store.
Yeah, there will be questions.
Yeah. It's a store and, you guys are getting paid, but how do I get paid? So, it'll be interesting as we see that roll out. And it's like, when's the next GPT? Who is the next GPT billionaire? Or is there a whole creator economy that starts to pop up around GPTs? Is exciting to think about as well. So we shall see. So we're coming up at the top of the hour. So thank you guys. This has been a thrilling conversation as always. And I'm gonna go ahead and sign out. And thank you, audience, whoever you are. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you guys soon.
Thank you.
Later.
Thank you.